Hey everybody, welcome back to Manga Mondays, the only manga review show that doesn't even have any manga in the backdrop because I'm in the middle of moving. But today I'm going to be talking about Astro Boy, the first giant omnibus volume. So you've probably heard of Astro Boy. It's one of the oldest manga in existence. It was the first TV anime ever, the adaptation of it, which was also directed by Osamu Tezuka, who drew the manga. The godfather of all manga and anime, the guy who drew like 1,000 stories in his life, incredibly. Lots and lots of shorts, some longer series, best known for Astro Boy, Blackjack, Princess Knight, Kimba the White Lion, and myriad others. And yes, this was like the one that got him famous. This is his first big one. It's a children's manga about a robot boy who has 7 special powers. He can shoot machine guns out of his ass. He's got rocket boots. He's got super hearing. I don't remember all of his powers, but he just kind of goes on action adventures in a future world where robots are everywhere. Most of the stories are about robots. They're about the nature of being a robot. And other than that, they're pretty all over the place. Some of them will be like a political story, some of them will be like a social issue kind of thing. They all have some kind of like political, socio-political backdrop to them, in spite of being children's stories, which are fairly simplistic. Like, they are often just rollicking adventures with lots of action that move very, very fast and jump from thing to thing to thing. These stories will go through like so many different like elements on their way to the end because it's just constantly introducing new shit. Lots of really experimental and playful paneling and stuff, lots of meta, lots of breaking the fourth wall. It's like Osamu Tezuka had every idea in the world about manga, and he explored all of it in the course of doing Astro Boy. And what's interesting about this particular omnibus collection is that these stories are not in order. This is a collection of Astro Boy stories from all over the timeline of the series, and they're organized sort of by Tezuka, and like each chapter will have an intro page or a couple of pages where he literally writes himself into the story and like explains what this chapter is about and like some of the context surrounding it and like his thoughts on it and stuff like that. Or sometimes he's even just like interacting with the characters in the story, or like those intro pages will just segue into the story itself. It's kind of fascinating, but this really feels like the unhinged creativity of this guy. Like, he would just come up with stuff and put it in the book, you know? And it's interesting the way that it manages to simultaneously, like, just be a fun, breezy action story for kids, while also clearly having all these, like, relatively heavy-handed socio-political messages in it. And I think what I find most interesting about this book is its use of robot violence. Because there is a lot of violence in Astro Boy in terms of robots breaking each other apart. You know, robots destroying one another. And what I think is interesting about it is that it obviously, like, got past censorship because they were robots. Like, you never see a human die. It's always robots destroying each other. And yet, like, the main themes of this book, this is an extremely pro-robot story. Like, it's always about how humans are the bad guys. Robots would be good if not for the fact that humans made them bad. You know, like, so robots are always sympathetic. Even if they're being used for evil purposes, they are ultimately sympathetic. And so, it's really intriguing that the robots are like these deep, realized characters. Well, not necessarily deep, but they're realized characters, and they, you know, they're treated like people. Like, a lot of the stories are about robot rights and how there's like a robot rights movement. There's one story that's about a robot president who gets elected, and he's trying to protect robot laws. Or, like, you know, there's various stories where like an anti-robot law is going to be passed, and they have to do something to stop it. So this story is constantly insistent that robots are essentially people, and yet it will just, you know, have them get destroyed at the drop of a hat. Like, good robots, good sympathetic robots will get destroyed. And so it's interesting how he's kind of able to write, you know, a sort of dark and effective, like, emotionally effective story. And I mean, granted, it never gets like dark. Like, Astro Boy is never going to make you fucking deeply upset or something like that. You know, most of the characters who do get destroyed are only maybe around for a certain, like, for one arc, and it never gets like sappy or dramatic. And yet it just is kind of surprising that you're like, yeah, there's like real characters who constantly get destroyed in this manga. And I can tell it's done with self-awareness. You know, he's sort of poking fun at the fact that it's okay for them to get destroyed because they're robots. We perceive it that way, even though he's constantly insisting that that is not the case, that robots have rights and should be treated as people. So yeah, these stories, they definitely range in intrigue, quality, and length greatly. There's like 3 or 4 really long stories in here that make up like the bulk of this book, and then probably 4 or 5, maybe even 6 shorter ones that are just like one chapter. And those ones tend to be less interesting. Usually they're just about exploring like one key idea. And they all are like just super breakneck and abrupt. Like, scenes will just fucking end. Chapters will just fucking end. Like, you'll be reading a long-ass story, and it'll wrap up in 1 page. Like, the bad guy gets destroyed, and they're like, everything's cool now, and then that's the end of the chapter, you know, or the story. Even though there's other parts where there'll be like a protracted battle scene across several pages, but then the resolution is 1 page long. So it definitely prioritizes action. There's one long section where it's about like magicians, and they keep fucking around with the panels and stuff, where like characters will literally like peel panels away and hide under them. I'm trying to see if I can find that page. Yeah, here we go. Like right here. These characters are literally pulling the panel away so they can hide paintings under it. It's definitely got that, like, you know, that one Daffy Duck Looney Tune, where the artist is like deconstructing the fucking images as they're happening. It's got a lot of that kind of vibe to it. And just lots of weird meta jokes and characters just like making offhand comments about really broad ideas, or like just throwing in random shit, like random jokes that like literally they will say on the page, like, this image is just a joke and is not canon to this story. Like, it's totally bizarre reading through it that like Tezuka really did not cut anything out. He was just going all in on every idea he had. By far the most engaging story in here is the one where there's just a giant fuck-off robot gets created, and he's told to go destroy the 7 strongest robots on Earth. And it's this really long story about this big fucking robot who, as the story goes on, becomes an actually really developed character, and he has this interesting relationship with Astro Boy, where because Astro Boy keeps like saving him and he's kind of honorable, then he ends up becoming like kind of a good guy, even though he's going around destroying all these really virtuous great robots. So there's this total like you know, like, you on the one hand you're like, fuck this guy because he's like murdering all these you know, great robots, but at the same time he's only doing it because he's being told to and he doesn't want to. And you know, in the end he kind of comes around to being a good guy. So it's, you know, it puts it in your head like, oh, do I like this guy or not? Which apparently a lot of people were upset when he does get destroyed at the end, because Tezuka says so at the start of that story with his little narration bit. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, ultimately, it does feel like a kid's story. You know, it does. It's mostly about whipping through action after action scene, and while it can be entertaining with how inventive the ideas are, like, this book is fucking huge. It took me a while to read this, and I was definitely, like, exhausted with it by the end. Like, even though I really liked the giant robot story, that was by far the most interesting. Like, the couple of shorts that followed after it, I was just like, okay, I don't need to read all of Astro Boy. You know, like, I would encourage just looking up like what the best Astro Boy stories are and maybe reading a few of those, because it's fairly entertaining. I just don't think it's more, I bought this because it's Astro Boy. You know, I wanted to read the canon literature of manga. Like, this is one of the first one, like the first one to become famous. You know, Osamu Tezuka is the father of manga. I just kind of wanted to know Astro Boy, but I don't feel like I need to buy a second omnibus because I've read a shitload of Astro Boy at this point. This thing is 700 fucking pages. So like, I feel like I've got a grasp on the character and most of the side characters and like all the sort of culturally important aspects of Astro Boy. You know, but if there's maybe some other stories that are particularly famous, I might check those out too. So anyway, yeah, would I recommend Astro Boy? Again, like I said, look up the best stories. Like, not even all the ones in just this omnibus are all that great. You know, a couple of them are pretty interesting. The Strongest Robot in the World one's really good. The origin story is pretty good and pretty necessary. But, you know, it's worth reading if you're someone who's interested in the history of manga and want to see what it was like inside the mind of a genius who I mean, the thing about Tezuka's stuff is it really does hold up to time. Like, even though you can tell this is older because of a lot of like cultural references or just the paneling style being, you know, fairly straightforward, it nonetheless, like, it holds up. Like, the stories don't feel dated. They probably because the pacing is so fucking fast. Like, normally when I think of older stories, I expect a slower pace, and that is not even slightly the case here. This is breakneck. So, yeah, it's pretty good. You know, read it. Get your cultural heritage of manga.